Wat Po, in this oldest original freestanding Buddhist temple, which also a center of medicine for Thai Ayurveda, okay, affiliated with the royal family, blah, blah, blah. There is a fully intact Taoist temple and Taoist shrine inside the Buddhist temple. And so it's really cool because I like to take people to Wat Po, and we don't go where the current guides want to take you because they've got their route and their spiel and their thing. We go on the other side of the wall from the popular tourist side, and we go to the Taoist shrine, okay, which is equal antiquity, okay, equal antiquity. And so the Taoist idea of the Hara, okay, the Taoist idea of the Hara is we superimpose over the navel a figure, a Chinese figure, which is called a Bagua, okay, which is an 8-sided figure, which has 8 trigrams around a yin-yang symbol. 8 trigrams oriented around a yin-yang symbol. The navel is the yin-yang, and then you have a north-south, east-west axis, and you have the quarter directions on the axis. And each one of the trigrams relates to a direction, relates to an element, relates to a season, relates to a time of day, relates to an organ, a hollow organ, a solid organ, relates to one of the 6 breaths of heaven, which are the yin-yang pairs of meridians, or one of the fundamental 12 meridians, or the macrocosmic orbit, or what have you. But there's very complex symbology within those 8 quadrants, right? Each one is signified by a trigram, okay? And I'm not going to give you a complete lesson in Taoist I Ching and in the Bagua, but I'll say that 5 of the symbols relate to elements, fire, earth, metal, water, wood, and 3 of them relate to constitutions, okay, like wind, breath, and heaven, okay? So those are not elements, but they are constitutional qualifiers, okay? And their interaction with each other creates 64 hexagrams, and the 64 hexagrams are supposed to be a complete cosmology or a complete model of the universe, inner and secret and outer. So the inner, outer, and secret, okay? So what I would do if I'm applying this principle, I'd look right here, and I'd look at for any obvious signs of distortion. Is it slightly enlarged here, or slightly enlarged here, or slightly enlarged here? Is there a discoloration here, like perhaps it's a little bit red, or maybe even really red with maybe a yellow ring around it right here? Or if I look for any obvious scar tissue, look for any obvious scar tissue, and then I might look and see what is the orientation of the navel on the Bagua. In other words, does the navel favor metal, or does the navel favor heaven? Okay? And then that distortion tells me something about the energy of the person right now. And if I can make a good determination of where your energy is right now, I know what it was like a year ago. And I can predict the pattern that it will follow for the next 3 months or 6 months or next year. And then the therapy that I would prescribe would be, let's handle the karmic part, that's last year, which is unresolved, which still hasn't been cleaned up. Let's handle the immediate imbalance, which is what's displaying itself or what's happening right now. And let's set up a program to prevent the negative side of what is happening in the future, which I see as your trend. Okay, and then all of that together, that's your medicine. Yeah.
Does it change on a woman when she has her period as opposed to not having her period?
Yes, it does.
So if you read them, it could be totally different if you read them
Actually,
later.
it changes twice a month.
Okay.
Because you have those 2 peaks. You've got your ovulation and you've got your menstruation cycle. So yes, it does. Now, let's say you don't know about energy. Pretend you don't know about energy. You don't know about elements. You don't know about the seasons of the navel. You know, let's say you don't know about any of that stuff, okay, which wouldn't be far from accurate, would it be? And let's just say, let's just take it from one point of view. All right, first thing, just the pure physiology of the navel and the umbilicus, why it's important. Okay, why it's important. Okay, when Aaron touches his navel, Aaron, touch your navel. This means you'll have to wake up to do that. You know, that's your belly. Your navel's that little hollow place in the middle. Okay, so when Aaron touches his navel, okay, he's actually just don't play with it. Just touch it. When Aaron touches his navel, and notice just even at the thought of it, did you see all this little, you know, all that? At some point that actually means something. But let's say Aaron touches his navel. He's now making physical contact with the only physical point on his body that has a continuous physical history that goes back to the moment of conception. How about that? Now, how many people have like, you know, you watch Nova and you watch the Discovery Channel occasionally, and so and maybe you've even had some training. Maybe you went to school in college. You took an astronomy course or astrophysics course. So you've heard some discussion on the origin of the universe, and perhaps you've heard this concept called the Big Bang. How many people have heard of that, the Big Bang? Okay, it seems to be everybody. Once in a while, somebody's like, no, nothing comes to mind. But basically, if I could just give you the real, and also, I have to say a caveat now, because there are now alternate theories about the origin of the universe, okay? But let's just go with, but the Big Bang is still the dominant one, and it hasn't been disproven. There's just alternate theories now, okay? And who knows, this may actually change. But as far as the body is concerned, the metaphor is beautiful, all right? The Big Bang is essentially has this idea that the history of the universe is linear, that there's a linear history of the universe, that there's a past in the universe, there's a present in the state of the universe, and there's a future in the state of the universe. And the past and the present are not exactly the same, and the present and the future are not exactly the same, and the future may look a little different than the beginning, okay? And the idea is that our universe started as a single point of infinite density of energy and matter. A single, and it's referred to as the singularity, capital T, capital S, the singularity, all right? So we're postulating that there was there was no universe, so this is before the universe, but whatever medium this singularity existed, and some scientists now say at that point it was dark matter and the singularity, okay? That's what the singularity existed in, was a sea of infinite dark matter, okay? But for whatever reason, there was this one point, and when I say one point, I'm talking about a point of infinite density, but which was only one particle wide, high, and deep, okay? And for some reason, according to the astronomical theory, because no one knows, there's no good theories about why the Big Bang occurred, this infinite point of density and of energy and matter divided. And when it divided, there was an explosion. And that explosion released all of the material and latent possibilities of expression of energy and matter in an ever-expanding wave. And the envelope of that ever-expanding wave is our universe. And there it is. That's how the universe came into being. So it starts with one, and then one exploded, and then as a result of that explosion, everything that was separated in that explosion, in other words, one became many, so everything that was no longer one, but was now separated, eventually began to, based on various principles, and we could just call it affinity and gravity, affinity principle and gravity, clusters of similar energies and what started to recollect to each other and they became gaseous clouds and solar systems and galaxies and the birthing places of stars, and eventually stars aggregated, and as part of that process, so did everything else. All the elements were, the periodic table of elements came into existence, and we have all that there is. All that there is, okay? Well, guess what? That's exactly the history of the body. So we start out as a single unfertilized cell. A single unfertilized cell. That cell is fertilized, okay? As a result of that fertilization, the exchange of one strand of DNA, okay, the cell divides. And as a result of that division, because once that division stops, it never ends. Once it starts, it never ends. So that cell, that unfertilized egg, bloop, divides, and then divides again, and then divides again, and then divides again. And there is roughly, there's no correlation that's more perfect. There is an explosion into manifestation of material and energy. The end result of which is this universe, which we call us, which we call the body, okay? This point in the navel is the only point on the physical body that has a continuous physical existence to that place. Now, it's really interesting. Yoga is about unity. And if you study jhana yoga and bhakti yoga, and you hear these principles of oneness, of becoming one, okay? It's about getting back to the source, about getting back to oneness. Oneness with what? Oneness with everything. Oneness with God. Oneness with your true self. It's about taking what's multiplicity, what is infinite diversity, and somehow, like herding cats, roping it all together and moving it all back in the direction where it came from, which was one expression of conscious being, which some people say is God, or the God nature, or the God consciousness, samadhi, nirvana, okay, whatever, however you want to describe that, okay? So, in the physical body, everything is exploded apart, and we have now not one cell in the body, but we have billions and billions of cells. Billions and billions of cells. We have the God cells, okay, which are in modern science referred to as stem cells. They're interesting because any stem cell shares the same properties as the fertilized egg, and that it can become any other cell in the body. Any stem cell in the body can become, under certain conditions, it can become any other cell in the human body. So even as adults, we still produce stem cells, but we don't produce as many as immediately following our conception. We don't produce as many as when we're a fetus. We don't produce as many as when we're a baby, because in our really young life, just like in the young universe, we're all about possibility. We're all about possibility. And so of dominance of our cells, just like in the newly formed universe after the Big Bang, has the capacity to go in any myriad of different directions. And literally, the same elements have the capacity to become suns, which have the capacity to become planets, which have the capacity to become galaxies, and so on and so forth, right? All right, so from a physics point of view, what the holy grail of physics is looking for the unified field theory and the everything origination theory that allows for a simple description, i.e. mathematical formula, which will allow for the fact that everything can come from anything. That will allow that everything can come from anything. That's the holy grail of physics, okay? And the physicists and astrophysicists have found their common hunting ground. You know, the chemist and the biologist have found common hunting ground, okay? And everyone says, and there's really a lot of excitement about this concept that if this formula is found, if this conversation is able to be made, this argument is being able to be made successfully, and this formula to be generated, it will change everything we know about everything we do. And the world will change as a result of it. So there's some very, very positive people who are using every scientific medium at their disposal to try and answer this question and come up with this unified field theory. All right? And that's another way. When you hear that term unified field theory, okay, you can make it in your head, you can interpret it very simply as you're trying to find a formula which proves that everything is related to everything else and what that relationship is, and everything is made from everything else on some level. Everything can become everything else at some level, and in fact, eventually does. And in fact, eventually does. Okay? All right, so now we're back to the stomach again. Here's my Big Bang. Moment of conception, boom. That cellular explosion occurs and begins to unwind in the same kind of pattern that you see that galaxies and star systems follow when they unwind and when they explode and then they coalesce and they take on their life of their own. The spiral pattern and the elliptical spiral pattern and the gravity-centric, concentric, and eccentric contraction type of physics is a model that everything that there is in the whole universe follows. We do too. If you follow the development of a fetus from the umbilicus and the fetal development, and you follow the organ development of the fetus and the spinal cord's development and where the organs are placed in relation to the spinal cord and so on, if you follow it in sort of stop action motion, you see that it unwinds in a spiral as this very rapid, explosive, eccentric motion occurs to the cells. Now we say, what tells those developing cells what to do? There is an underlying principle, which is the model that the cells follow. Now, a biologist would say the model is in the DNA. Okay, biologists say the model's in the DNA. Another reason why I don't think it's a good idea to be monkeying around too much with the DNA is that, because if that's true, we have potential to disrupt the matrix model, the blueprint of life that life follows in its development and expression of all of the qualities of life. That's Frankenstein, folks. It's really a risky proposition. Okay, and I wonder why more I think, it's twofold. I think every geneticist has read Mary Shelley, and I think some of them are horrified and some of them want to be Dr. Frankenstein. I think there's an attraction and repulsion thing there. Half of them read it and they're like, we got to avoid that, we got to watch that, and the other half are going, he just didn't have the technology. The problem with Dr. Frankenstein was he didn't have an electron microscope and he couldn't implant bacteria or virus into a substitute DNA, because if Dr. Frankenstein could have done that, his Frankenstein would have survived. We would have called it a genetically derived cloned being, which of course is what we're hell for leather trying to create right now. Okay, not just corn. Remember Dolly the sheep. If you think that there's just one sheep in the world that scientists have cloned, there's just one animal that they have cloned, and if you think for 1 second in your naivete of life that there are not research groups of secret think tanks which are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to clone human beings, you were just sadly misguided. Even though the president and actually Bill Clinton passed a moratorium on human experimentation with cloning, okay? You can believe that just like you can believe the reason we're in Iraq is because we're there to free those people and to bring them democracy. You can believe both equally as much. Okay? Back to this. All right, so here we are, his unwinding history, the organs unwinding. Now, from a physiological point of view, each of the primary organs, the liver, the spleen, the kidneys, the gallbladder, the stomach versus the small intestine versus the large intestine. Each organ in the body is actually wrapped with a fascial sheath. That's what it's called, a fascial envelope or a fascial sheath. The purpose of that fascial sheath on one level is that's what keeps the organs separate from everything else. It's why the liver gets to be the liver over here, and it's not impinged upon by the other organs. So the sheath encapsulates the organ, giving it integrity, okay? But also another purpose of that sheath is it's not limited to the organ itself, that actually it is like a spider web that holds the organ in place. And so that's why your liver doesn't migrate to the other side, and why your spleen doesn't migrate. Like when I lay on this side and lay on this side, it's why my organs don't swap. Don't swap places. It's why they don't move around. The fascia is what connective tissue, that fascial envelope, its attachments both to bony sources, bones themselves, and to each other, is what keeps everything relatively in place, but it's not a hard system. It's not a hard system. Think of it as a suspension system, okay? There's some movement, which is allowed. That's part of, also, it's part of our natural, not only does it keep things in place, but that springiness in the suspension system is a shock absorber. And that's why, for example, if I punch you, that if I bring pressure to bear on the liver, for example, I don't just destroy the liver or bruise it every time. And part of that's because energy is dissipated through the superficial soft tissue and muscles. And then when the impact comes to the liver moves away from it. And then it moves back. So there is the shock absorption system, and it's an energy distribution system. Okay? Now, why is that important to the navel? And why would I care about any of this? Well, the one common attachment for all of the fascia that is the individual envelopes for all of the organs is in fact the umbilicus, is in fact the navel, because that's where they all came from. And they maintain an adhesion and an attachment. And so I hope you get where I'm going here. So when I look at the navel, for example, I don't know him well enough to know what his baseline is supposed to be. Is he an innie or an outie? Or does he naturally always have a tweak to the left or right or whatever? You might be under the impression that your navel is always the same and it's always been the same. Okay? That's actually not true. It changes dramatically based on your health. It changes dramatically based on the season. And it changes based on your age. Okay? So for example, let me give you an example that you can work with. If the liver starts to swell or to become enlarged, okay, let's say you've been drinking too much and you've developed some cirrhosis and you've got some agitation and some irritation and some inflammation in the liver. As it enlarges, it puts pressure on its fascial envelope. As it puts pressure on its fascial envelope, it puts pressure on the attachments which support that fascial envelope and the positioning of the liver. And some of that energy is communicated to the umbilicus, and you will have a distortion of the navel. Okay? Now, that will happen for every organ. So if the kidneys become enlarged, that will cause a distortion in the fascial envelope. If you have a prolapse or distortion in the large intestine, that will cause a distortion, apparently, in the navel. All right. So in an old school Thai system, they would look at your belly. You always had to look at a person's belly, and you would read their belly. I'm projecting this bagua, and that has qualities, right? Those elemental qualities and seasonal qualities and all that. But I'm looking at this as the original yin yang. And so my teacher said this is where the yin yang comes from. You know, so as a symbol, the original yin yang was actually the spiral that's in every navel. Okay. Now, of course, there's some variation based on how it's tied and the scar tissue and all that, but you get where I'm coming from with that, right? And that's why they always put the navel in the center of the bagua. Okay. That the whole universe was in fact the abdomen and the organs. And if you've studied Tai Chi and if you've studied Qigong, you've heard references to this. that in fact the organs are treated as planets, that the navel is in fact a metaphor for the sun, and the planets are in orbit around the sun, and they have various kinds of interactions. The planets are not passive in respect to each other. Their gravitational fields actually push and pull on each other. The way that we found all of the outer planets was not by direct observation. The way that we found all of the outer planets in our solar system was we observed the next one closer, and we realized that there was an inequality in its orbit, that there was a lope, there was a curve, there was something that wasn't symmetrical, that could not be accounted for by its orbit around the sun or the inner planets. And so what they would do is they'd say, well, every time it goes around, look, right here it goes a little further. Every time it comes around, right here it goes a little further. And so they postulated that this deviation in the orbit, that the only thing that could cause that predictable, regular deviation in the orbit would be another planet. And so then they would go looking for the planet that's causing that. And they knew where to look. See, you don't just find a planet by, well, just point your telescope up in the sky. Okay? They knew just where to look because they did the math, and they found the greatest deviation in the perfect symmetry of the elliptical orbit, and then that's where they looked. And that's where they found the planet. And then that's how they found the next one. And that's how they found the next one. Okay? The Taoists understood this principle. We don't know how long ago. Don't know. But it's the same principle that we use to determine imbalance in the organs. But we start from the center and work out. Okay? Now, without understanding every bit of this, what is the benefit of looking at someone's stomach? Well, it's because there is a lot that you can learn right away, especially in relation to hidden issues and pathology.